is the force obtained when two or more forces are combined. No? So, pinagsasama natin. No? So ito, so pag-aaralan natin, resultant of three or more concurrent forces. So pag sinabing concurrent, so all forces are acting through a single point, or the line of action is passing through a single point. So halimbawa niyan, so itong figure natin. So F1, F2, and F3, no? So yung past lesson natin, so para makuha yung resultant, no, is gumagamit tayo ng parallelogram law. So kaya lang matrabaho kapag meron ng three or more forces, no? Kaya meron tayong isang method pa para makuha yung resultant, no, ng forces. So ang tawag doon is the component method, no? So paano 'yon? Paano gamitin yung component method? So the resultant force is determined from the algebraic sum of its component. No? So algebraic sum of its component. So gagawin natin, i-resolve natin yung bawat forces, no, into x and y components. No? So pagtapos i-resolve yung forces, no, into x and y components, no? So yung ginagawa, so ina-add yung components algebraically. Then may sign convention pa rin tayo dyan. Pag to the right, positive. To the left, negative. Upward, positive. Downward, negative. So una, so kukunin natin yung summation ng x components. No? So yung sum niyan, so that is the x component of the resultant force. Then, pag pinag-add lahat ng y components, so that is the y component of the resultant force. No? Ayan. So, kukunin lang natin yung sum. No? Ayan. So, wag nyo na itong i-memorize yung formula na yan. No? So, nakabase lang yan doon sa figure natin. Then, the components of the resultant force of any number of forces can be represented symbolically by the algebraic summations of the components of the force. No? So, yun nga. So, ito ang kailangan i-memorize. No? So, the x component of the resultant force, so that is equal to summation of forces along x-axis, or summation of all horizontal forces. While FR sub y, so that is the y component of the resultant force, so which is equal to summation of forces along y-axis, or summation of all vertical forces. No? So, yun po. So, the x and y components may be sketched along the x and y axis with their proper sense of direction once they are determined. No? So pag nakuha mo na yung sum of x and sum of y, so pwede mong gawa ng sketch yun. No? So, pag parehas positive, no? So, ibig sabihin nun, yung x component mo to the right, y component mo upward. No? Kapag ganon, nasa quadrant 1 yung resultant force mo. No? So, kapag ang components mo naman, yung x component nasa to the left, and y component mo upward, yung resultant force mo naman nasa quadrant 2. Pag parehas negative, no? So, ang resultant force mo naman is nasa quadrant 3. Pag positive ang x, negative ang y, ang resultant force mo naman nasa quadrant 4. So, ganun po. So, by sign, no, makikita mo nasaan ang resultant force. No? Nasa ang quadrant siya nag-act. So, ganun po. So, from vector addition, so the resultant force can be determined. The magnitude of the resultant force is then found from the Pythagorean theorem. No? So, resultant force equal to the square root of the x component squared plus y component squared. No? Or, no? So, mas sanay tayo square root of summation of forces along x squared plus summation of forces along y squared. No? So, di ba sa physics, ganyan yung notation natin. So, ito na lang din yung gagamitin natin. So, yun, no? Yung paano makompute yung resultant force. Then, the direction of the resultant force, theta, is determined from the trigonometry. No? So, angle theta is equal to arc tangent or inverse tangent of the y component over x component. So, absolute value. No? Yung positive values yung kukunin lang natin. No? Or pwede natin itong i-write as yung arc tangent of summation of forces along y over summation of forces along x. No? So, ang theta natin, no? So, laging with respect to the x-axis. No? Based from this formula. So, kung nasa quadrant 1, no, ito yung resultant force mo. So, ayun yung angle theta. Quadrant 2, diba, ayan yung resultant force mo. So, ayun yung angle theta. Above above negative x-axis. Pag nasa quadrant 3, yung resultant force mo, so ayun yung angle theta mo. Below negative x-axis. At quadrant 4, kung ayan yung resultant force mo, so angle theta mo is below positive x-axis. So, pag ginamit tong angle theta na to, so laging with respect to the x-axis. So, ganun po. No? Tandaan yun. No? O, example tayo. No? So, determine the magnitude and direction of the resultant force. No? Yan, so meron tayong 400 pounds at quadrant 2, 30 degrees above negative x-axis, 200 pounds along positive y-axis, 300 pounds, quadrant 4, no, 30 degrees below positive x-axis, 100 pounds along negative x-axis, and 500 pounds at the quadrant 4. No? Then meron kang small slope triangle, 3, 4. So, yung other side is 5. No? Ganyan. So, solve natin, no? What is the resultant? So, una, no, solve natin yung summation of x and summation of y. No? So, summation of forces along x-axis, no, to the right positive. So, that is equal to, so una, 400 pounds. So, the x component of 400 pounds is to the left. So, that is negative. No? So, ano ang x component ng 400 pounds? 400 pounds times cosine 30 degrees. Very good. Next, 500 pounds. Ano ang x component ng 500 pounds? Positive, negative. 500 pounds times, so that is 4 over 5. Then 300 pounds, quadrant 4. What is the x component? 300 pounds times cosine. Itong 200 pounds, may x component?
Wala po, sir.
100.
Wala din po, sir.
Wala na yun. No? Very good. No? So, summation of forces along x-axis, so equal to negative 400 times cosine 30 plus, minus 500 pounds times 4 over 5. Then plus 300 times cosine 30 degrees. Ano sagot?
Negative 486.603 po, sir.
603 pounds. Y component, summation of y. So, upward positive. So, unahin natin. 400 pounds. Ano y component niya?
Negative 400.
Positive, no? So, 400 pounds times sine 30 degrees. Next, 500 pounds.
Negative po, sir.
So negative 500 pounds times
3/5.
3/5. So next, 300 pounds. 300 pounds.
Negative, sir.
What is negative? 300 pounds times
Sine 30.
30 degrees. The next 200 pounds upward. So positive 200 pounds. Then 100 pounds downward.
Negative 100.
Negative.
Negative 100 pounds. So what is summation of forces along Y?
Negative 150 po.
So that is negative 150 pounds. No? So yun. So meron na tayong X and Y components. No? So nasaan ang resultant force? Anong quadrant? Quadrant ano ang resultant force?
Quadrant 3 po.
So that is quadrant 3. So parehas negative. No? So pwede mo sketch yun. So ang X component, so to the right, to the left, then Y component, downward, no? So, resultant force mo, so, nasa quadrant 3. Yun, no? So, to solve for resultant force, so formula natin, so, FR, so that is square root of summation of forces along X squared plus summation of forces along Y squared. No? So, substitute mo lang. So, square root of negative 486.603 pounds squared plus negative 150 pounds squared. No? So, resultant force is equal to 509.197 pounds. No? So that is the resultant force. So what is the direction? So what is the angle theta? So angle theta, so that is equal to arc tangent of summation of forces along Y over summation of forces along X. No? So equal to, so arc tangent of negative 150 pounds, then X natin negative 486.603 pounds. No? Ayun. 17.132 degrees. No? So that is below negative X axis. The resultant of the concurrent forces shown is 300 pounds pointing up along the Y axis. So compute the values of F and the angle theta are required to give this resultant. So resultant force daw is along the positive y-axis. No? So, hanapin natin yung magnitude and direction ng unknown force F. Ayan. So, that is the resultant force. No? So, di ba, ang resultant force, ang formula natin, no? So that is equal to square root of summation of forces along X squared plus summation of forces along Y squared. So, yun po. So, ang resultant force, so meron din siyang X and Y component, no? So, yun po. So, itong summation of forces along X, so that is equivalent to the X component of the resultant force. No? So, to solve for the X component of the resultant force, no? So that is FR cosine theta. No? So, kung ang angle natin is with respect to the X-axis. No? Then, summation of forces along y. So that is equal to resultant force. No? So y component of the resultant force. No? So para makuha mo yan, so that is resultant force. So that is sine theta. No? So, nga po. So provided no, the angle no, is with respect to the x-axis. No? So ganyan po. So that is resultant force. No? So ganyan. Ganyan yung formula natin. No? So in this case, no? So binigay na yung resultant force. So uh, along y-axis. No? So yun po. Positive y-axis. So ibig sabihin, no, resultant force along y-axis. So the x component of the resultant force is 0. No? And the y component of the resultant force. So since it is upward, no, pointing up along the y-axis, so that is equal to positive 300 pounds. So hinahanap natin, so what is the magnitude of force F? Ayun. So gagamitin muna natin tong formula. No? So summation of forces along x, so that is equal to x component of the resultant force. No? So summation of forces along x so equal to x component of the resultant force. So yun. So ang gagawin natin, so kunin natin no, yung x component ng bawat forces. No? So, yun po. So una, so x component of force F, so tawagin natin siyang Fx. No? So that is Fx. No? The next, itong 500 pounds to the left, so that is negative 500 pounds. No? The next, 240 pounds. No? So to the right yung ano niya, x component. So that is plus 240 pounds times kami mo multiply para meron kang x component. Saan? 240 pounds times cosine 30. No? So, x component eh. So, that is cosine 30 degrees. So, equal to, so what is the x component of the resultant force? So, x component of the resultant force is 0. So, yun. So, solving for x component, so that is equal to, transpose mo lang. So, that is 500 minus 240 times cosine 30 degrees. Ano sagot? What is the x component? No? So that is positive 292.154 pounds. No? So store natin sa calculator. No? Store at A. No? Okay. The next, solve for the y component. So, y component. So, paano isa-solve ang y component? So, ganun pa rin. No? So, gamit naman tayo ng summation of forces along y is equal to the y component of the resultant force. No? So, y component of force F, so that is Fy. So, equal to Fy. The next, y component of 500, 0. Then y component of 240 pounds. So y component of 240 pounds, so that is negative 240 pounds times sine 30 degrees. So equal to, so what is the y component of the resultant force? So that is, 300 pounds. So equal to 300 pounds. So, solve for Fy. So, Fy is equal to that. Ano sagot? What is Fy? Ano po? What is Fy? So, Fy is equal to 420 pounds. No? So, yun. No? So, nasa ang quadrant yung force F. So, X component is positive, Y component is positive. So, nasa quadrant 1. No? So, solving for the magnitude of force F, no? So, ito yun. So, parehas positive. So, force F mo, so ito, then angle P. No? So, to solve for force F, so we will use Pythagorean theorem. No? So, F, no? So, equal to square root of Fx squared plus Fy squared. No? So, yun. So, square root of Fx, so that is 292.154 pounds squared plus Fy, so 420 pounds squared. No? So, force F is equal to, ano sagot? So, that is 511.619 pounds. No? So, that is the magnitude of force F. The next is the angle phi. So, for the angle phi, so ganun lang din. So, arc tangent of Fy over F. So, arc tangent Fy, so that is 420, sorry. 420 pounds over Fx, no? So that is 292 point, ano yan? 292.154 pounds. So equal to, ano sagot? 420. So that is 55.177 degrees. So that is above positive x axis. No? So nasa quadrant 1. So ganun lang po. So unknown forces. No? So, sample problem number 4. So ganun din. No? So if the magnitude of the resultant force acting on the bracket is to be 450 Newton directed along the positive UX axis, determine the magnitude of F1 and direction P. No? So, direction P. So sabi, yung resultant force daw along U. No? Ayan yung U. So, ilagay natin yung resultant force. Ayan. So yan. No? So, along U. No? So that is 450 Newton. So solve down natin what is the magnitude of F1. And yung angle phi. No? So yung angle is with respect to the y-axis. No? Okay. O, paano natin isi-solve? No? So una, solve natin x and y component of the F1. No? So para ma-solve natin yon, no? So gamit ulit tayo ng formula. Summation of forces along x, so that is equal to the x component of the resultant force. No? And yung isa, no? Summation of forces along y, so that is equal to y components of the resultant force. Ayan. So unahin natin to. No? So x component of the resultant force, ang formula natin is F times cosine theta. Ayun, no? So una, hanapin natin x components. No? So x components of F1, so tawagin natin siyang F1x. Then x component of F2, so to the right, so that is positive, 200 newtons. Then F3, quadrant 3, so that is positive, no? 260 newton times, no? So small slope triangle. So x component, so that is 5 over 30. So equal to, so resultant force, x component, so F, so that is 450 newton times cosine, so the angle is 30 degrees. So what is F1x? F1x is equal to, or ano po? What is F1x? Ano po? F1x is equal to, ano sagot? So that is 89.711. Very good, no? Newtons. No? So positive, no? The next, solve for the y component, no? So that is summation of forces along y, so equal to y component of the resultant force, no? So y component of the resultant force, so that is equal to F times sine theta, no? Okay. So y component, so tawagin natin siyang F1y. The next, so F2 walang y component, F3 negative y component, so that is negative 260 newtons times, ano, saan mo i-multiply para meron kang y component? So times 12 over 30. No? So equal to, so y component of the resultant force, so that is 450 newtons times sine 30 degrees. So what is F1y? Ano po? So that is equal to 465 newtons. No? So positive. No? So nasa quadrant 1 din yung F1. So solving for F, so square root of summation of F1x squared plus F1y squared. No? So square root of 89.711 Newton squared plus 465 Newton squared. No? So what is the force F? So force F is 473.575 newtons. Next, what is the angle theta? Or angle phi, no? So angle phi So, angle phi natin is with respect to y. No? So, ayan, with respect to y. So, ang magiging formula natin, so that is angle phi is equal to arc tangent, no, of f1x over f1y. So, arc tangent of f1x, f1x is 89.711 over f1y, 465 newtons. What is the angle phi? Okay na, may sagot kanina. So, that is 10.92 degrees. No? So, that is right of positive y axis.